It's presence over perfection. And that's so important. Standing there, stand up for your kids. Most of all, hug your kids. There's nothing more than that a child with ADHD needs than your support and your hug. So what we're asking you to do today is, fathers, give your child a big hug. Let them know that you're there. We miss our son. We wouldn't have been so involved if we didn't love him so much. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Tony.
And I'm Casey.
And we're with Anthony's Way, the Road to Kindness. And thank you for joining us for our podcast, The Way Forward, a Kindness Mission. And today's a really special podcast.
Mm-hmm.
First off, happy Father's Day. And it's a very special day. Fathers, you play a really important role in all of your children's lives, especially those that have ADHD. And we've done a lot of calls with parents, and it seems like the moms are always on the phone with us. I've had one or two where the dads got involved, and it's really important that dads, you are part of the process. This is a process,
a very important part.
And the more you can stay connected in with your family and with your child or children, the better off. And I mean, I had a lot of challenges as Anthony was. We found Anthony had ADHD. We have 3 daughters: Gabriella, Merritt's our oldest one, Aubrey, and Gabriella. And trying to get everybody connected and everybody understanding what ADHD means was really hard.
It was hard.
And the struggle.
ADHD doesn't just affect the child; it affects the whole family.
And there were times when Anthony would be running in and out of the rooms, bothering his sisters. And there were times when that really wasn't an issue, and there were times when it really was an issue. So, you just have to sometimes go with the flow, and that's easier said than done. And I wasn't always the best father. I always tried to be there and be at all the events for all the kids.
You always made your kids a priority.
The challenge that I had was the stress of having the job, traveling, and then, working late, having deadlines, being on my, the calls, the phones. And sometimes you want to put the cell phone away when you get home, and you need to do that. And I did that as I got a little smarter. I started putting the phone away, and I'd be with the kids while they were up, and then I'd start my work again. So, you have to figure out your schedule. But there's some really important decisions that we thought and we would talk about today, and share a little bit about how I participated in some of those decisions and how, they were important in shaping the life for Anthony and also for the rest of our kids, because it is so important. And, moms, in our family, Casey was the grounding source. She was there. She was home. She was an advocate. She's an advocate for all the kids. Especially Anthony. And I was blessed. And that I had to work. I was working, and Casey was at the school with the kids and with Anthony, and trying to balance it all out and coming home. And it's not easy. It's not easy. We understand that, and we've lived through it, and we're here to help. And that's part of why we created Anthony's Way, the Road to Kindness, to create a road for parents to follow. And today's one of those days where we're going to try not to take you on an emotional roller coaster ride. We're going to do our best to not do that, but we know that there'll be some emotional times in here. So first off, one of the most important things decisions that we had to be part of together, we had Anthony's diagnosis, and that was really, both of us were kind of shocked. We didn't really know what to do, and we looked at each other, and thank goodness that we had a really nice, good pediatrician who gave us a little bit of guidance. But the one area that we weren't on the same page on initially was the medication side.
Well, I had spent a lot of time looking at what ADHD was because it was 20 some years ago and had no idea what ADHD was. So I was on the computer, pulling up articles, trying to figure out what it was and where to go and what to do. And so, of course, I had read about the medication, and I had talked to Tony. I talked to you about it, and you had said he's never going on medication. And I'm like,
did say that.
Well, can we just go see what write down some questions and let's go see what the pediatrician has to say.
And so we did. We finally came to agreement. We have to talk to somebody because we can't make that decision alone. That was not a decision that we could make, and it was and obviously included Anthony, but it was an important decision that we needed to deal with. And so we did go to the pediatrician, and our doctor's name was Dr. Derwish, and he was a great guy. He had all the kids, and so why don't you run through the scenario that we went through with him and what he said to us, because it was a very heartfelt discussion that he had with us.
Right, and he spent a lot of time with us, but. Tony doesn't ever go into anything without being prepared. So he had his full list of questions. And of course he had the one about, the medications, and he expressed his thought to Dr. Derwish about not wanting Anthony to go on medication.
I needed to understand why though, right? I needed to understand why. What was the medication going to do to help?
Right. But then at the end of it, Dr. Derwish said, well, you don't have to put him on medication, but if you don't do something to help him, when he's 12 or 13, he's going to start self-medicating, and then you're really going to have problems. And so that pretty much got Tony's attention.
That really hit home for me.
So we decided to try it.
It hit home for me, and then so then we went to a psychiatrist, and we started seeing a psychiatrist together.
Yep.
And that was also we needed to do that because the stepping stones are we needed someone to guide us and to make sure Anthony was, if we're going to go down a medicine path, so we can understand. And we've always heard, and you hear the stories. My child isn't the same person. He doesn't act the same. He's not the same, and so. We did get him on some medication, and he went through 2 or 3 different medications till we identified the right one to work for him. And we were very patient. I probably got a little fired up because it wasn't working. And,
right.
And I probably said at one point, I told you so, it wasn't going to work. But at the end of the day, the medicine, we found the right medicine for him, and it did help him. And that was the benefit, because we didn't want him to be self-medicating when he was 13 years of age. That in itself scared me, and to the point where we needed to do something, and we did. So there were a couple other decisions along the way, and some of these were learning challenges. Let's talk a little bit about learning, because you're going to run into it. If your child is diagnosed with some learning challenges, like our child was diagnosed with dysgraphia, and dysgraphia is where if I said Johnny ran across the street to Anthony, he could not take it from here and write it down on paper. He could tell me what I said, but he couldn't elaborate he couldn't take and put it down on paper. And that was a big challenge for our son.
And it was the same with spelling. Yeah, spelling and math, both.
So, and the girls didn't have any, our girls didn't have any challenges with math, with English or spelling, or reading. They were all on top of it. And so we had to figure out how Anthony learned. And we tried a number of different things. So as a father, you sit there and you say, well, you ask the question, well, why can't my son get the ABCs? Everybody else gets the ABCs. And we had to talk through that with the psychiatrist, and we had to figure out some other ways to learn. But we were always told this, and this is something that always stuck with me, is that we can get him to learn it one day, but the next day he probably will forget it. And to
try to make it fun.
Yeah, and so what I did is, and Casey was doing all she could do to help him with the ABCs. We did flashcards. We did all kinds of things. When we would be in the car, we'd be flashing, letters up. So yeah. I said, how about if we play a game, to Anthony? So let's play a game. So let's write up all the letters on paper. We'll cut them all out and we'll roll them up into a ball, and we'll put them in a basket. And we took them downstairs to our little play area, and then I started taking. I put the basket. I took them all out of the basket. I put the basket down a little ways. We played basketball. So I took them out. I took each of the letters out, and as he would, and we, so he'd get them right. I'd give him the paper. He'd crumble it back up, and he would try to make it into the basket. And it took us. We did that for about an hour, and he wasn't getting bored because it was fun. He was moving, And the cool part was that he'd open them up, and he was just so excited when he got one or two right. And but the next day, we show him the number, show him the letter, and he didn't remember it. So he just had to have a ton of patience.
And it was very frustrating for him, and
it was
and
very
for us.
frustrating for him. But we tried to make it fun. We tried to make learning fun, and that's what you have to do. And as a father, you could play a role in that. You could play a role in, you got to have some patience, and that's not always one of our virtues. It wasn't one of mine, but I had to have patience. And if it's a game, I could play a game all day. If it's basketball, I could play basketball all day. We did other things. We'd say if you get it right, you could throw a frisbee across the room, and we'd do frisbee downstairs. And so it was just trying to make it interesting and fun. And if you can make it fun, then learning occurs. And eventually learning did occur. And we helped them through that, and the teachers in school, and
he had a tutor.
And he had tutors. Tutors are great, and we said, we're going to give him tutors. The girls didn't have any tutors, but we said, Anthony, and we were so grateful for the tutors that he had.
We were very blessed to find the people to help us that we needed. We were very blessed.
They were like grandmothers to him, and really special parent people, and we thank them greatly for their help. And so you may have to have your child go to a tutor, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with getting a tutor, and it's all part of the learning process. For me, I was all happy because I knew the one tutor that he had, she had ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So she said to us, I have ADHD. I understand exactly what your son's going through, and I think he confided more in her than he did with us.
He did.
And it was a learning process, but he started learning, he started catching on, and he was just so excited. And that's part of this whole process, is that, yes, there's frustration involved, but when they do start to pick it up and they do start to get the understanding of what they're learning, whatever subject, reading, whatever it might be, math, it's a big accomplishment. And you have to, as a father and a mother, you have to celebrate. You each celebrate. We do high fives, we do other stuff, and we get all the kids involved. So the other thing is that, as fathers, and I was working all the time. But when I had vacation, all right, initially when I had vacation, I would work all the time. And once Anthony was diagnosed, we started doing some different things. And we would stay home, and we would play some games, and we created the Beleza Olympics.
Right.
Remember how the kids looked at me like, Dad, you're nuts.
Well, Mom looked at you like you were nuts.
Mom looked at me like I was nuts too.
I am not athletic at all.
So we got all the kids involved, and we created the Beleza Olympics. Like, I'll tell you, actually, we had a pool at the time, and we put the lanterns out, and our opening ceremony was to walk around the pool lighting the lanterns up. And it was, we tried to make it as much fun as we could, but then we created games. Some were board games, which everybody could play. Some were pool game, being in the pool. And, I'll never forget the one time, though. You mind if we share this?
I don't care.
Okay.
There's one thing that I'm very good at.
Yeah, that's why. Go ahead, tell him.
Out.
So we decided to do a float in the water game. And so I jumped in. I think I sunk right to the bottom. I couldn't float. So all of us ended up.
It's not floating. It's treading water.
Treading water. So, but who was out there with you at the end?
I don't remember.
I think it was
Anthony.
Anthony and
I don't know.
Meredith, Aubrey.
All I know is that every one of them could not believe that I was still treading water.
Yeah.
They're like,
So,
"Oh my
I
God."
think it was 20 minutes later.
It was a while. I was always good at treading water.
And Casey was still treading water, and we were all clapping for her because mom's tread water. It was a fun time. But so that's the kind of stuff that we tried to do as a family. And there were times when all the girls would go in their own room, and but then when it came to the when it came to school time and nighttime, and some of you may experience this because kids, a lot of kids with and without ADHD, sometimes they don't like to go to bed, and that can always be a challenge for parents, and for us it was a challenge sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
But what we did is we said, okay, we decided that we were going to create another, we're going to call it story time. And I'm sure you tell your kids stories or you read stories to your kids. Well, this was a time for all of us to get a little animated. And we created the antics of these two little Italian boys, Anthony and Johnny. And Johnny was a make-believe. I was probably Johnny, but Anthony was himself, with their sisters, Meredith, Aubrey, and Gabrielle. And we would create stories about how Johnny and Anthony would be these kibitzers. They would kid around with their sisters, and whether it was and fun times, it was fun. Whether they were they were throwing water balloons and getting them, or they were up in a tree and they were yelling to their sisters or whatever it might be. We just had fun with story time, and the kids would always. They would be animated. They would animate. They would make voices, sounds, and it was just a fun time. And we would lay together and we talk, and that was how we found that we could calm everybody down, and then everybody would go off to their bedrooms or go to sleep. And Anthony, that was for a child with ADHD, that was his time to come down, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
It really worked, and we kept that going. I don't know, probably till they were 10, 11 years of age. As long I wanted to do it forever.
As long as we could, as long as they would allow you to do it. As long as they wanted
to be part of it, and we thought about, one summer, we got out some paper and we drew out what Anthony and Johnny would look like, and the kids and the girls, and and we just tried to make it fun. So, it's challenging. But if you don't put some fun and enjoyment into it, it's even going to be more challenging. So, and there were some really rough times. I mean,
absolutely.
And I wasn't always the most patient father. I feel bad about sometimes when I would get really mad because things weren't going right.
But that's one of the things we do as parents is we beat ourselves up when we feel like we haven't, when we look back at it and see how we did things, and now that we're on the other side of it, how we would have done things differently.
Yeah.
So I think that's the hardest part, and it's hard not to beat yourself up about the challenges and the mistakes that you make as parents of an ADHD child. And it's going to happen because nobody's perfect.
Yeah, and this is not about being perfect. This whole discussion is about being there for your kids, being there for your child that struggles. I
would say patience and being calm in the middle of the storm is probably the best thing that you can do, and we didn't always succeed in that.
The other thing that we tried to do, and we think we were pretty successful with, was trying to find the passions for all the kids, what they really wanted to do. And if you've been listening and following along, you'll know that, it took us a little time to get Anthony to find his passion. He did some sports. We did all the sports, and one that was really fun, not fun for him, but
it's fun to watch.
Baseball. Okay, you can't. The challenge for an ADHD child is that,
I think, what was he, 6?
Yeah, you can't put him out in the field and nothing happening, and Anthony would sit there and he'd drop down and he'd pick the grass
in the outfield,
and then the ball would come rolling by him and he'd let the ball go. I mean, and he tried to hit, and hitting was okay, but it was he said, I think he said, "Dad,
this is not the game.
This is not for me." So, and then we got him a scooter, and one of our neighbors would call him, "Hey, Scooter." He'd be yelling at him, and Anthony would be flying up and down the road on his little scooter, and and skateboarding, and then we got him into martial arts. I got to tell you that was a big change. That was and there were mornings that when Saturday morning came and he wanted to sleep, and I was there, we got to go, and Gabrielle was there when and he just didn't want to get out of bed.
Well, he did cut out for a while.
We did. So we worked all the way up together. The goal was we're going to do this together, and we found the right school, the right teachers, the right masters that help with the martial arts, and they really embraced Anthony. They embraced all of us, but he was so good. He was finding a passion for your child is so important, and I can still remember as we got progressing along, and we got into some of the weapons and the staff, and I'm trying to do a figure eight with the staff, and there's Anthony, and it was just I sat back and I watched him, and then the other thing that we would do is we would practice, and there were many times I put the mitts on, okay, and so as a father, it's great, kids are hitting the mitts. And I would always say, hey, when the mitts go down, there's no hitting. Mitts to go down, and he would still hit me. And so I chased him around, and he'd say, "Dad, I'm sorry." And he'd give me a hug, and I say, "It's okay." But at the end, it was, you got to find their passions. And all the kids, Gabriella, Meredith, and Aubrey, they all had passions, and we all wanted them to pursue what they love to do. And it's just about being there. And I could remember some downsides of this thing too, when, he didn't get picked for a soccer team, and the emotions that come into play, and, and then, or friends. I mean, friends was always, until he got the confidence that he needed, friends didn't stick around.
Because he was different,
Yeah.
and they didn't understand it, and the parents of the kids didn't understand it. So we tried to have play dates most of the time at our house, so that I could be there to help out if I needed to.
You were a good mom for doing that.
But it was hard for him when he would really be excited to go play with somebody at their house or whatever, and then he was never invited back again. And not because of anything that he had done that was bad, just that they, he was impulsive, and sometimes he, did things that he shouldn't do, but not bad things. But anyway.
Yeah. And then, but then he hit a point, we're 13, 14, he got his confidence. Mm-hmm. And what was really cool is, we tell people this, that he became a little social director. Mm-hmm. So why don't you share a story about snowboarding? Because this is really cool.
When he was in middle school, they started ski club, and he wanted to learn how to snowboard, and he had never snowboarded before. So he joined ski club, and there were times that there were kids that wouldn't want to sit with him on the bus, so he would end up sitting by himself. So what he did was he convinced all of his friends to join ski club, who had never skied or snowboarded before, to join ski club so that he would have somebody to sit with on the bus. And they still do it to this day.
They still do it. And yeah. What we used to do is at New Year's Eve, the one, what was it called?
Ski Round Top.
Ski Round Top would have a New Year's Eve get together. So we'd take all the kids, and they would all go snowboarding down the hill, and we would sit there, and we'd be in front of the fireplace seeing them come down the hill. And that was great. And but the point of making is that if you encourage them along and help them with their social skills, they can create a little network of friends. And that was really powerful for our son. And so many times, rather than sitting there doing screen time, he would go out and they would figure out a game outside to play, or they would go skateboarding somewhere. And that was a blessing, because we wanted them to do things. We wanted them to be active. So
right. We always said that he always wanted to have somebody to play with. And so when Dad was home, Dad was his playmate. Mom doesn't play. Mom reads. So, but we always told him he should have been a twin because then he would have had somebody there with him all the time.
It was really cool though. Then as he got older though, he started connecting more with his sisters and and talking with them, and and that was really special. It brought everybody together. And then as he started moving through, he started figuring out, and he'd watch NASCAR, and he'd watch cars speed, race tracks, and he'd be looking at cars, and we would watch the Make 'em Auto shows, and we even went to the Make 'em Auto shows. And this is really touching for me. Anthony's senior year, he came, and he said, "Dad, let's do a project together." And he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He was a little manipulator too at times. So he said, "Why don't we get an old car, and why don't we fix it up together?" So I said, "You know what? I would love to do that. And you could guide me because he was working on cars. He loved cars, and he loved all kinds of cars. But he loved BMWs. So what we did is we searched for 1 or 2 months, and we found this place that had old BMWs, and they would sell them. They would do some work on them, and the hope was that you would bring them back to them and did do some work on it too. So we found an old beat up 1989 red BMW, pushed in bumper, somebody jumped on the hood, the door was banged, the interior was all dirty, filthy, and it was the vinyl stuff. But the nice part was there were no cracks in all these old BMWs. They have cracks in the dashboard, no cracks in the dashboard, only 95,000 miles on it. So we bought this, and we laid a plan out. So we got to lay a plan out how we're going to do this. So we started cleaning inside, and then eventually he said, "Dad, let's get some new tires, some new rims," and he found the rims, and we'll put them on, and let's get some new shocks. So you got to have some shocks in the back, and let's get a new muffler, and let's get a new. So a lot of the work was done ourselves or with this group that we knew. We had to get another AC unit put into it, and all this stuff, and it was. He worked on it, and he loved it, and so I got to share a story because this is really so. Loved it so much that once we got these new tires and rims on, one of his friends says, why don't we go out, Anthony? And he had a car, he had an older car too. He says, "Why don't we go drifting?" And at the time I wasn't sure what drifting was, but
I wasn't sure that he said drifting. He said, let's race in the church parking lot.
Yeah, so they went to a church parking lot, and no one around, nighttime. It was after supper, I think, or before supper, and they went drifting, spinning, and
making lots of noise.
Of course, the church parking lot had just done over the pavement, the macadam, and they leave. All right, about an hour later, we get a knock on our door, and it's the police, and saying, "Was your son?" And I said, "We didn't know. We had no idea." So we call Anthony over. "What'd you do?" And they tell us what he did, and that he was going to have to go to court. And so we looked at him, and like the police left, and we looked at him and said, "What'd you do? Why'd you go do that? We just got all this stuff known." He said, "Dad," "I just love the stuff." He said, "I wanted to go try and see what we could do." And I could see that we could see he was already beating himself up. I mean, he was, whether he was crying or he was sad, and we just gave him a hug and said, "We'll have to work through this, but whatever the outcome is,
right,
you have to
do
it.
Yep.
And we'll do what we need to do. We'll go in." And so he got community service to do. He had to go to the church, and he had to spend the whole day with their maintenance people. And I don't know what he did. He cut grass, he trimmed hedges, and he came home and he was so exhausted. He just had one day. That was the outcome of this, was that you had to help them. And it's the other person who had it, they had to do the same thing. So, but there were other times when things would go wrong, and he did something wrong, and it was his impulsiveness that he just would jump at the chance of doing something, and
like going drifting,
and
not thinking about how it's affecting other people.
And we get mad, and then he'd come apologize, and we always work through it, and that's what it's about. We want to communicate.
Always knew that we were there for him.
Yeah,
always.
You got to be on his side, and you have to be there. If you're not there, you can't be on his side. And as hard as it might be with work and the demands of the job, demands of the other children and family, it's important that your presence is known. And that's what we want to tell you today, that it's presence over perfection. And that's so important. Standing there, stand up for your kids. Most of all, hug your kids. There's nothing more than that a child with ADHD needs than your support and your hug. So what we're asking you to do today is, fathers, give your child a big hug. Let them know that you're there. We miss our son. We wouldn't have been so involved if we didn't love him so much. So we want to wish you, fathers, a very happy Father's Day. We want to share this a little bit with you, that we hope today's conversation reminded you that being a father isn't always about having the answers. It's about showing up, listening with your heart, and growing alongside your child, helping them to find their passions. To dads navigating with ADHD, if you have ADHD too, you know the challenges. And you have a child that has ADHD, you know those challenges. You have learning differences. If there's learning challenges, help. Be there. Through all the ups and downs of parenthood, know that your son, your daughter, they matter more than ADHD.
And you also matter more than as their dad.
So your presence makes a difference. Your voice, being part of their life, it all counts. From Casey and from me.
And our whole team.
A very happy Father's Day to you. Celebrate with your children. Enjoy them. And let's walk the road with kindness and courage every day. And give your kids a hug from us. Thank you. Thank you for spending time with us today.
If you liked today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who could use the information. And remember, a little bit of kindness goes a long way, especially for those kids with ADHD. See you next time.